Welcome to another episode of Just More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justsomemorefix.com or on Twitter at justsomemorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts, wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about That Damned Peculiar Business. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Willie D. Nelson from All Things Good and Nerdy, a pop culture podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network. Just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other tantalizingly geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
All right, welcome to Just More Fix. Before we get rolling today, thought I might just kind of recap. We talked about HillCon a lot last episode. Actually, we recapped everything, but I just thought I want to mention one thing is that after this HillCon, I did the editing for the episode, and we have this couple times throughout the year we kind of run out of sort of episode topics, I guess, you know? And in talking about all the games that we played and all the stuff that we did, I realized a lot of inspiration came out of HillCon this year, which was unique for us. We always have a good time and have a lot of fun playing games, but this year, Gen Con always energizes me for the year in gaming from Gen Con to Gen Con, but after HillCon this year, I really felt pumped up and inspired because of some games that we have coming up, and then trying some new things at HillCon, and then sort of stretching our storytelling muscles, and then just some awesome realizations that we had about some things from running games and whatnot. What?
I was just thinking, like, before that, I was in kind of a funk because, I don't know, like, I worked so many days and you were, like, gone. And so I was trying to put this together. And I just had no intentions of running any games whatsoever. Yeah. And I haven't felt like running any games whatsoever for quite some time. I've been devoid of all ideas and or creative energy whatsoever. But then we sat down at the table and it was like, well, who's running a game right now? You know, and some people had some things, but I wanted us to have more options. And then it was like, okay, you guys aren't done with your game yet. We've got like an hour and a half to 2 hours. What can I do in that amount of time? I was just trying to keep things flowing and keep games going so that there was just continuous game. Ended up forcing me to do some things. And I don't know, it went like really well. It was sort of like one of those moments. Yeah. When you're thinking, maybe I'm actually good at this.
Well, that ties back to something that
I didn't
one of these
prep
things
any,
that,
like nothing. Except for Three Sisters, because
yeah. No, but that comes around to another topic that we're going to go into later on. But I agree. And when you mentioning, hey, I can run these games, normally there's a lot of kind of indecisiveness that kind of happens sometimes about who's going to run games when we're not sure or whatever. And then a lot of times I just sort of step in to fill that void because I'm just more assertive, I think, than anything else sometimes. And I was like, nope, I'm not doing this because I know I got this Yellow King thing happening. And it was cool to back off and sort of put it back at the group. Do you know what I mean? You know? And then
we were sitting there, right? And I knew you had Yellow King coming up, so you didn't want to run anything else.
Right.
And then Carrie ran a game upstairs. And then she was gone, and she's like the other person that jumps in when there's a GM. And then there's, you know, this new guy at the table, and I know Greg's not going to run anything because he never GMs. Right. So I'm just sitting there like, well,
I guess it's me
guys. And Kurt was sick, so he was like, I was literally the only option.
Right. Yeah. I could have jumped in there with
guess
Dredd,
there's something to be said for no other choice.
We had mentioned Dredd, and I thought, I can totally do this. I'll bust something out and we'll make Dredd work. And then I kind of waited to see if you were just going to step up and do it because I thought you do a good job at it. And that's why I was like, oh, okay. And then you kind of jumped right in there and took off, and we had a lot of fun. So I don't know. So going on a little bit about HillCon again, but it was just one of those things where this is the first time I've come away from it being really inspired. In a bigger gaming context, because it's always a fun time. We always have a good time with, seeing friends and stuff. But this time in just a larger gaming context in terms of like inspiration and things to do and games to make and run and play. It's put me in kind of a really cool headspace. So I was just really, really happy about that. So yeah, I don't know. Every HillCon has been a different experience. And this one has been, super fun and inspiring in a lot of different ways. And I just thought it'd be cool to share that and let everyone out there know that I think we have some really cool stuff in the future coming and some cool ideas and some things to do. So along with that, part of the inspiration, I'm happy to say that we've got some new games that we're actually getting to the table and getting to play in the near future. So maybe some new episodes about that kind of stuff happening. Okay, so I think we're going to jump into things today, or not jump into things today. I think we're going to jump right into this one. The intro of this might be a little funny because it's going to get chopped up pretty good because we had a lot of ideas flowing and some side talk about different things. So hopefully it comes together and it makes a little bit of sense. If not, just know that we're inspired and having a good time. We're playing great games. I guess that's the long and short of that. Anyway, at HillCon, I ran the Yellow King role-playing game and had a great time doing that. And there was something that came out of it that was really interesting. Actually, there's a lot of things that came out of it, and those are going to lead into a lot of episodes that sort of are going to be, broadly speaking, inspired by some of the things that we learned by playing the Yellow King RPG. But in this case, the Yellow King has a specific spot on your character sheet that is different from any other gumshoe system, and it has this section that's called That Dueced Peculiar Business. So what that represents is that it's something strange and inexplicable that has happened to your character. It's sort of like a direct connection to the supernatural. And ideally, in my mind, when the game master kind of lays out the theme of this game and what it's going to be about, right, then as a player, you should sort of use that to sort of inform what your peculiar business is, right? So in our case, I made it very clear that this is a world without Cthulhu. There are no Yog-Sothoth or anybody else. It's just Hastur, right? So there was no entity that was going to eat the world or anything. You know, like it was just this crazy madness that was sort of taking over as ideas as a virus, right? And so that sort of guided people's creativity, I guess, you know, kind of like framed it in a little bit to say, hey, these are the bounds that you can be within. And
it's sort of like you have to find something that's naturally unnatural.
Yeah. And in the case of our game, everyone that was there was some kind of art student. So whether they were writers or poets or sculptors or painters, photographers or filmmakers, and it was in the Weimar Republic in 1927 is when our game was set in Berlin. So everyone really did a good job of sort of latching on to that and sort of bringing that in. And it was at a lot of different levels, too, because your character, who is a violinist, had was it a tune that ran through your head?
It was it was a melody that was given to me during a dream. And I could not remember the second half of the melody. But if I started playing it, every time I played it, I would lose time. And it came out through gameplay that I would actually play the whole song. I just would not remember playing the second half. And then when you would ask me about it, it'd be like, oh, I don't know. I can remember the first part well. Let me just start playing it for you.
Yeah, right.
I think the rest will come to me as we go. You know, that kind of thing.
And then Caitlin's character, he did like sketches and charcoal stuff. And in his case, there was a mouse that he drew that was always in the paint in his drawings. It was sort of like move from painting to paint, or not painting, move from drawing to drawing, and was always involved in it, but he never remembered actually drawing the mouse. And someone else there's a lot of examples in the Yellow King book as well that are really good. There's, I'm trying to remember now. Oh, I should have got the character sheets up here for this.
I sort of remember mine and Kaylin's the most because we
they were most
spent a lot of time
involved.
like intermingling too.
Yeah.
I remember what Carrie was. She was a photography person. Lacey was something to do with the newspaper. And a gentleman who was already dead handed him a front page article about himself. Yeah.
So there was a serial killer from the period not from that period that had already died, and had given him a newspaper clipping with him in it, and sort of the timeline not lining up correctly, which was interesting, which was a big thing that I wanted to focus on in that game. And he didn't even know that, which I found really cool. And then it's actually a larger part of the next session is how time is not going to be linear in that kind of way. Spoiler alert, but I think you can probably already tell that anyways. It is. Yeah. There was someone that had something where the whispers in the streets, which is a very Carcosa thing, because it's always talking about the whispers, the echoes in the streets, is in one of the stories in the Yellow King. I think it might be in the Repair of Reputations. I can't remember, but somewhere specifically in Carcosa though. So there was a lot of really cool personal touches that got brought into it, and I almost wonder. So I framed it in and I said it has to involve Hastur, it has to only involve a Hastur universe, right? And then part of the character creation process was that you were all artists. So do you think that the part of it that you are all artists really made a stronger impact? Because it seemed like everyone that did something, whatever their peculiar business was, it was directly tied to their art form and whatever sort of art study they were doing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that makes the most sense for somebody to choose to have it relate to that, because it's such a large part of the character. And, you know, if you're going to school for that form of art and that's what you're doing, that's how you're spending a lot of time expressing yourself and getting ideas out of your head and out into the world, which is what Hastur is all about, right?
Right. Yes. Right. Infectious ideas.
So it's really like the perfect combination of things.
So I guess maybe you want to let me ask this a slightly different way. So playing these art students, right? You could have chosen to have the peculiar business be anything. Mm-hmm. It could have been very simply that every time I go to this particular printing press house, that not every time. So let me back up. Every time I go to, I had something printed at a printing press one time, right? Because my normal pressman and they were too busy to get my stuff printed or whatever. I do lithographs, maybe, let's say. Okay. So I had someone else print them, and I went there one time and I had them printed, and I don't remember what the art was that I made for that. And I also can never seem to find that print shop again. Every time I go to look for it, it's just not there, right? It's like the buildings are like the addresses jump one number or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So in that case, no, that still involves the artwork though, I guess, because you'd be doing lithographs and printing. So that's maybe not an example I was looking for. So let's just take it out of there, out of the printing part out of it. It's just somewhere that I went, and there's this place that I went, and I had went to a cafe or something and had a strange time there and wanted to go back. Maybe I got too drunk, and I just can never seem to find this location again. Does that seem more impersonal because it doesn't directly connect to the character in a meaningful way, other than the fact that maybe unless you just have a character?
Well, it's that, but it's also when I write something on my character sheet, I want it to be something that's omnipresent. Right. It needs to be relevant to me at all times. Mm-hmm. And like, music is something that you carry with you.
Right.
Characters in an art form that you make, it's just, I guess more personal is kind of right. Like that other thing would be weird. It would certainly be a good thing to have, but unless I go looking for that place every single night, it's not, like I want it to come up. That's why I wrote it on there.
So it doesn't have quite the larger story tie into it.
It's not as easy.
Yeah. Okay. So saying this, I agree with everything that's there. Because I think that when you have that moment tied directly to something that your character is involved in consistently, going to school for, producing these works of art of whatever kind it is, it makes it directly relevant to the character in a more meaningful way than just saying, I don't know, I had this weird thing that happened and I can't explain it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So can you think of a way to where you would have characters that are a more conventional Call of Cthulhu style character, where their peculiar business would be as meaningful as, say, the melody in your head or the newspaper article that was given to Lee's character, who was a journalist? I
mean, I think those could still be good peculiar business for another kind of mythos villain. I don't think they necessarily have to be. I think they work the best with Hastur because
no, I'm not saying that. I guess so. The peculiar business for your characters were directly tied to sort of like the high concept of your character, right? So yours was Russian violin virtuoso.
Ideally, they should be, right? Because you're talking about something that's strange enough that has shaken you to your very core. And in order for it to be that personally impactful, I feel like it needs to be something that's tied to a core value that you have or something that is central to your person. As a side note, I wanted to say this is not the only place that I've seen this on a character sheet.
Where else have you seen it?
This is part of Orpheus.
Oh, your near-death experience.
Yes.
We haven't mentioned Orpheus in a long time.
Yeah, you said like, oh, I haven't seen this before. I'm like, no, this is basically exactly the same thing.
Yes, it's similar, but I feel like in Orpheus it's more tangible. It's like,
well, but in that realm, you're talking about what ties you to the world of the deceased. So it's a near-death experience.
No, right, but then the shadow, or I can't remember what they call it now. Whenever you cross over, right, and you project, that world is sort of partially at least understood because you can physically go there, right?
Right.
Whereas with the Yellow King, whatever this peculiar business is, it's completely alien to you and you just don't really...
Right, no, I know that, but it's still what ties you to the other world.
Oh, yeah, okay. I can see that then.
It's very much,
like
I don't know, to me, it mechanically is sort of one, like, I guess mechanically it doesn't really do anything. But you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
as a character background tidbit,
I agree.
It's doing exactly the same thing.
I think one is a little more mysterious than the other because...
the setting is more mysterious.
Yeah. And that's the only distinction I'm drawing between the two is because I feel like the minute you understand the Yellow King is the minute that you don't understand the world anymore, and then whereas with Orpheus, the minute you understand that there is something beyond on the shroud is just a door opening to more mystery and to see things.
Let's be honest, you're just as close to being on the other side of the shroud as you are being crazy.
True. I don't disagree.
It is a short step, my friend.
But I feel like it's not a central focus of Orpheus, though. Do you know what I'm saying? Whereas the insanity is a central focus of the Yellow King. So, but I agree. There's a lot of similarities. And I also will say that I think, to be fair about it, I think you could present any of those games in any way you want. It's just, for the most part, especially the Orpheus, the only experience that you guys have had with it has come from me, and it's been my storytelling voice is very much in the vein of this sort of madness. I really like the idea of that, so I can see how they would kind of sort of like layer on top of one another, kind of in a way. But anyway, so I guess from there, one of my favorite moments, and I had kind of wanted to do it, I just wasn't sure I could pull it off, was because the mythos world in the case of Yellow King in the game that we ran is simplified. There's only one source for this peculiar business, right? There's no chance that your peculiar business is going to be tied to anything other than Hastur. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we're playing Trail of Cthulhu, well, yours might be Ithaqua, and then mine might be Yog-Sothoth, and then someone else's might be Azathoth, and then Shub-Niggurath, and whatever, right? There's all these things, these different elder gods that are peculiar stuff could be tied to, potentially.
Yeah. Yes, kind of.
So, well, here, I guess in terms of how you flavor it. So if I said...
No, I just don't think that makes... I see what you're saying as just like potentialities, right? But the peculiar business is always tied to my character. It's irrelevant what elder god it's going to be tied to because that's not my decision, it's yours.
Right.
And I guess if you wanted to play a campaign of Cthulhu, I don't know how you're expecting your characters to live that long, but then you could use multiple ones. But my thought most of the time, they're always ever only going to be tied to one elder god, whichever one you choose, which doesn't matter to my character at all because I don't know that.
Well, no, but I guess what I'm saying is that if I was to have, you could sort of shade it how you wanted to. So if I wanted to do Shub-Niggurath, maybe my peculiar business is that I grew up on a farm, and then we always had a particular, pig or some kind of livestock that would always have, some kind of strangeness about its litter or whatever, right? So whenever this pig would have 13 piglets, the 12 of them would be normal, but the 13th one would be all twisted and weird, right?
So I think it's cool to know the elder god you're going to be playing ahead of time because you can kind of flavor your peculiar business that way. But I also think it would be neat to have all the characters made first and have everyone pick their peculiar business. And then as a GM, kind of look at everybody's peculiar business and be like, oh, which elder god does this point me to? And then kind of plan my campaign after that.
My thought is that since it sort of like narrows it down, it puts everyone in the mindset of that all of our peculiar business is going to have a certain thematic elements to it, which automatically draw them together no matter what, right? So it's going to have themes of madness, of ideas spreading like a virus, compulsions, like all these things that are part of Hastur. And I think that's a strength instead of a weakness. I think that the fact that it sort of says, this is the conceit of this game, it sort of makes it easier on the game master end of things, which is where I was kind of trying to get with this, to sort of link up everyone's peculiar business, right? Mm-hmm. And I also think on the player end of it, if you see when you finally open up to the other players and maybe you reveal what your peculiar business is, that it makes it easier from player to player to sort of like try and make connections between them, which spawned some really awesome moments that were completely unintended in that game when you started playing your song, and then Kaylin was drawing and sketching different things, and then the mouse came out of it, and then it sort of grew from there.
It's a fun moment when you're like playing and thinking about what your character wants, but also thinking as a player, oh God, this is a terrible idea. But we're there now, and that is what is happening, and we're going to drive it all the way home.
Right. I feel like that's leaning into the themes of Hastur as well, is that you know that this is probably a terrible idea, but it's just you cannot resist the temptation to try it and do it and to try new things.
I like the idea of the peculiar business as a compulsion, because I think kind of the only player at the table who said that their peculiar business didn't necessarily come up was Lee. And his was interesting and it was cool, but it was an isolated event. And it didn't necessarily draw in an ongoing problem for his character like, mine did or Kaylin's did, because it more heavily involved our art. And his has to do with like the writing and the journalism. Right. But it didn't create an ongoing issue for him.
I agree. And that's part of that is on me as a game master as well, because the scenario that I had made up largely involved the film industry and that kind of stuff. And when I thought of characters that were going to be made as writers, I thought of them more as like writing scripts and writing stories or writing poetry, not as writing necessarily journalism parts and that kind of stuff. So while his character got pulled into it in terms of like he did the proofreading and all that kind of stuff for the script for the movie, that part drew him in as a writer, but it didn't draw in his peculiar business because that was more on a sort of like in a different kind of writing. So it was kind of hard.
Well, and it was very specific.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas just a tune is pretty broad, you know, a character in a picture, that comes up repetitively. Like it was, and like I said, like an isolated incident. Yeah. And I don't know, I kind of mentioned it when we were doing the HillCon wrap up too, but the peculiar business thing is like, yes, as a GM, you should be bringing it up and incorporating it as best you can. But, especially when there's a lot of people at the table, like it's kind of on the player too, to constantly bring it up. It's like, when you play a White Wolf game and you have a flaw, right? Like, I'm not going to keep reminding you, you need to keep track of that and be like, oh, you need to be playing that flaw. Otherwise.
No, I agree. Yeah, you need to be seeking it out. It's sort of like that thing that nags in the back of your mind. Right. It's like I think compulsion is exactly what you're talking about. Like in all these stories, there's always these characters that when they have this encounter with the unknowable, it becomes this thing that like creeps into every aspect of their life. So that when you go and buy the newspaper, you're always looking and you get it and you flip through it real fast to see if there are any articles that are about that serial killer.
Yeah, obsession and compulsion is perfect. Like it can't be, it cannot be ignored. It cannot be fought. Like I have to seek it out and I have to do it.
Well, and I think the crux of the game is when it goes from like this minor thing where it's just this habit you have, right? It's not necessarily life altering, but every time you play this song, it's always in the back of your mind, that other tune. Or every time you go buy the newspaper in the example that I mentioned before, you're always looking, but like you're not compelled in like a crazy negative way yet. That's what happens through the gameplay is
but as the more you feed it, right, the worse it gets.
Exactly. So that's exactly where I was kind of going, is that like it goes from being this sort of little thing that you do to being this consuming moment of your life, and yeah, I agree. I think in the case of with that, where Lee's character, his peculiar business was more specific, and I think if the more specific they are, the more preparation the game master needs to sort of draw them in. Whereas if it's made more broadly and more sort of like thematically, it's easier to draw connections on the fly, especially in the first session or in a one shot, to sort of draw connections and lines to one another and put them together. I guess to kind of try and draw this all to a close, I had a lot of fun involving these, and it was a cool way to sort of find the button as a player that you wanted me to push to sort of like reinforce the madness or the supernatural into your character, is the way that I saw that. And it was fun to be able to do that, because it was like, how do you want your character to go crazy? Like, what do you want the source of where do you want the source of your madness to come from? Do you know what I mean? And go ahead.
I just had a question. So is it automatically decided that you pick your peculiar business during character creation? Or okay.
Why?
Well, I just wondered if it's something like you could be playing and then something happens during a session, and then now that's your peculiar business.
I
and
think
now
you
you're
could,
driven forward.
But I think you have to go at that game with a different mindset. Sort of like
it's like those stories that you read, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I'm just a regular private investigator, and I was going, sort of that more pulpy sort of thing, and that one case that you just can't get over,
right?
Yeah.
I think you totally could, but I think you have to go at it with a slightly different mindset. And I would compare it to the difference between running a game where you make vampires for the masquerade versus if you make a character who's a ghoul or a mortal who hasn't been embraced, and we go through like your character being embraced. It's like sort of like a big setup for the tone of the game, and sort of if you're going to do that, I feel like you have to have players that will lean into it knowing that they're going to have a moment that is going to forever haunt their characters in some way. And if they're trying to avoid that, then it sort of defeats the purpose of doing it that way. Do you know what I'm saying? I think if you have the right kind of players that will lean into that, and like what you said before with you and Kaylin being like, I know this is totally the wrong thing to do, but we're going to do it anyway because
you just have like a super fun investigative noir game that turns Cthulhu that way. Like that could be a fun fun journey. Especially, with like making the wrong choices and just being perpetually doomed right into non-existence.
Do you feel like that would be too much of a tone shift, though? Going from something that's like a straight noir world and then suddenly things, because in my mind, if you're going to set that up, you're going to do it over several sessions, right? So maybe you do 2 or 3 sessions of where it's just like classic noir investigation. And then we have a gear shift and it goes to more mythosy supernatural?
No, I don't think so, because maybe I'm wrong, but noir is kind of about sort of heroic failings.
Kind of, yeah.
And that seems like a very natural segue to me.
I think it's the glorious
it's like
part of
making, it's like the Catcher in the Rye tale, right? Like I came upon hardship and I decided not to make any changes. And thus the boring story was had. And then the more interesting story comes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. No, I think it's
not the Catcher in the Rye is noir, because it's not.
No, it's not. But yeah. Thanks for that.
I just have to throw it in there periodically.
No, I think it's easily done with the Yellow King, because Hastur to me, so like Cthulhu and all these other elder gods, they're like sledgehammers. Boom! Supernatural. Boom! Elder sign. Boom! Right? End of the world. Hastur is more like a scalpel. And it's because it's more like anesthesia. You know what I mean? Like you go to the thing, you go to the surgery, they put you in the bed, count backwards from 100, and then you wake up. Like he's so subtle. And then by the time and I feel like that slides into investigative thing really well. So I just think that I think Hastur works in a lot of settings to be like as a reveal to something larger happening, because he's not a sledgehammer. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's less jarring that way, because could it just be weird coincidence of synchronicity of things lining up and weirdness that way? Or could it be some elder being, with madness spreading everywhere? Sure, it could. Who knows? And I think that because it's a little more subtle that way, it works better to sort of introduce it without breaking themes too much. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but I think really maybe it's just the fact that I like Hastur that much more is finally coming out now that there's actually a solid outlet of a game that's sort of designed around it. I see it a little bit differently now in terms of a gaming rule, maybe, because most of the gaming that I have done that involved Hastur wasn't. I never conceived of a world where it was just Hastur, if that makes sense, as in terms of running a game. And I think it changes everything, and I think a little bit off topic or whatever, but like I just think that it's a much more interesting world as opposed to, hey, these things want to eat and destroy the world. Do you know what I mean? What?
I'm so easily distracted in my brain today. Yeah. I don't know. You just were talking about these things that want to eat and destroy the world, and like right before that, and then I was thinking about like pandemic, but like what if like all of the world's problems were tied to a different elder god? And then I was like, oh my gosh, what if you could be like the Avengers of the mythos, right? Like there's a problem and it's like an elder god and you're like a suit anyways.
You're going to show up and like Captain America punch some.
Right, exactly.
No.
Yes.
You have left the mythos.
Yes.
You have left the mythos, okay?
Nope.
Yes, afraid so.
Listen. It's just like, what do you call those with the monster creatures that battle each other? The Japanese thing. Kaiju, yes. It's like superhero mythos kaiju.
That's called Pacific Rim, but anyway. All right, so the only other question I have was in terms of your character and on the player end of things, did you feel like this changed things from the other Trail of Cthulhu games that we'd played? And was that because of the Peculiar Business? And should we add that to Trail of Cthulhu? Or is it just because it was Hastur and it was Yellow King? Do you know what I'm saying? Does it make sense?
Yeah, but I don't know because I haven't played the other one with the Peculiar Business, so I don't know if it's that or if it's both. Or
well, do you think that?
I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of change.
No, I agree from
what we've done before.
Do you think that we should add the Peculiar Business to whenever we play Trail?
Yes.
Right on.
100%.
Okay. And then do you think that it changes character creation in any significant, not mechanically, because it doesn't have a mechanical effect, but like, does it put you in a different headspace?
I picked that part last.
Right.
Which I think is important because it should relate to the core concept of your character,
right.
which you should make first.
Right. Oh, I agree.
She'd be like, I'm going to pick my peculiar business in the design. I guess you could do that. I mean, people do that with like powers and vampire, right?
Well,
like, I'm going to have these disciplines. Now I will make my vampire.
Well, no, but that's a mechanical effect. Whereas I feel like sometimes when you have things that involve story, sometimes you like when I make characters, sometimes I have a cool idea of an event and then I kind of work backwards and forwards around that and sort of shape my character around this one significant event. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Not always. It just depends on how the inspiration strikes me or whatever. But do you think that it? So I'm gonna back up. So you don't think then that it changed the way you made? I mean, obviously only doing it one time. Did it change the way you went about character creation? Not
initially, no. I think it's like adding an aspect in Fate, right? Mm-hmm. It just gave me more of an in-depth idea of what kind of character I was.
Okay.
Like it gave me some backstory to pull on.
Well, I was just kind of curious because it's one of those things where it's the first time I ran the game and I was so caught up in the moment of trying to be on and trying to do a good job running the game and portray a world with no Cthulhu that I sort of, a lot of things that I would normally pay attention to and how they worked. I just paid like zero attention to unless it was relevant right in the moment, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of interesting for me afterwards to look at some things and be like, whoa, I see how this definitely added a lot to the game. And that's something to pay attention to in the future or whatever, you know? Mm-hmm. Right on. All right. Well, anything else to mention about that damn peculiar business? Or should we wrap this one up here?
I think I'm good.
Right on. Well, we've raved about Yellow King quite a bit, and I'm sure we're going to rave about it a whole lot more because the Yellow King RPG is a really, really awesome game, and we had a lot of fun with it. And that damn peculiar business is a really interesting aspect to add to the to your character creation, and I think it works for any game that involves some kind of supernatural horror, whether it's Trail of Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu, or I don't know, you could probably even do it in Ravenloft. You know, like any kind of game that involves some kind of otherworldly horror, I think you could very easily slot that right in there. And it doesn't have a mechanical effect, so it's just some weird way for the game master to pull strings for the character to say, hey, this is a weird moment and there's some craziness creeping into your world, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm just thinking beyond even that. So some games that would be like less obvious, right? So like it could be really interesting to change the flavor of like a Connex game. You know, to take it from just playing like X-Files to adding an extra sort of twist to, you know, like a
it's
mysterious
kind of,
twist.
I think it's already in there in X-Files because Mulder? Mm-hmm. Is it Mueller?
Mulder.
Mulder. Yeah. No, Mueller is the FBI. Okay, yeah. So Mulder always talks about this experience that he had when he's a child. So I think that is that damn peculiar business. It's just that one's a slower burn in terms of it getting brought in. It's always this thing like, this is why I'm here. And this is why I do it. but it doesn't really get brought into the story aspect of it till much later or whatever. So, but I think
Sully doesn't really have one of those.
No, she doesn't. But she's the foil to him. Yeah,
right.
So,
yeah, I think it would tweak the way that it plays out just a little bit. I could even see you using it in other things, like if you wanted, like I said, if you wanted to just change the flavor of the game. You know, I had another idea. I think it would be really cool if you were doing like a Malkavian as opposed to picking picking some peculiar business that
just like an obsession,
like nags at you. Yeah, you know.
Well, that would be obsession or compulsion. You know, like it would be.
Well, and the way that it's written in a narrative feels more role play relevant as opposed to just picking some kind of DSM 5 value that you're trying to portray, like a story. Something
and it makes it a little more real, a little more tangible, a little more easier to portray, I guess, in terms of at a table anyway. So
it could certainly be interesting for Lamentations of the Flame Princess character as well.
Yeah. I agree. I think it'd be cool for a World of Darkness game too, or Fewer Mortals, and saying what's the peculiar bit, but not necessarily telling people that it was going to be World of Darkness, but be like, hey, kind of laying some broad thing out and then saying, whatever you choose could dictate where the game is going to steer towards, whether that's wraith or werewolf or vampire or mage or whatever it is. That could be a really cool way to sort of do a World of Darkness game as well. Right on. So yeah, lots of potential there. I think that's really cool. So if you think of any other cool aspects or ways to sort of connect that damn peculiar business to other role-playing games, or if any of you out there have tried the Yellow King role-playing game and have had a good time or a terrible time with it, we'd love to hear some feedback from you. So drop us a line and let us know. You can email me, James, at Just One More Fix. You can hit us up on Twitter at Just One More Fix, or you can join our Facebook group and join the conversation there. If you like what we do here at Just One More Fix, you can support us at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix and join all of our awesome Patreon supporters and get access to our raw audio feeds and pre-shows, as well as our quarterly zine in print or PDF format, depending on what level you support at. And you can join the awesome ranks of all of our Patreon supporters like Alistair H., Alan White, Hector Treelane, Simon McNair, Timothy Barra, Tiziana Furlano, and the OG Todd Olson. As you know, we are also a member of the Gonna Geek Network, so you can head over to GonnaGeekNetwork.com and check out all of the other geeky podcasts that exist over there, like The Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., Better Podcasting, and Game Life Balance. Check them out over at GonnaGeekNetwork.com, and that'll do it for us, and we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at Incompetech.com. You can support us at Patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.